This is Breakthroughs, a podcast from Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. I'm Erin Spain, Communications Director at Feinberg. AI, which stands for Artificial or Augmented Intelligence, is helping physicians and scientists make unprecedented breakthroughs that are transforming the practice of medicine. But with the rise of such powerful technology comes questions about how we will use it. To consider these questions while continuing to advance human health with AI, Feinberg recently launched the Institute for Augmented Intelligence in Medicine, or IAIM. Dr. Abel Koh is the director of this new institute. He's also an associate professor of medicine and preventive medicine and the director of the Center for Health Information Partnerships in the Institute for Public Health and Medicine here at Feinberg. He joins us today to talk about the new institute and how it may help medical professionals and biomedical scientists shape the development of next-generation biomedical tools. Welcome, Dr. Koh.
Good morning. Thank you.
So why is the institute called Northwestern's Institute for Augmented Intelligence in Medicine? Why is the term augmented instead of artificial, which is what we're used to hearing in the media and such?
Yeah, well, I've never loved that word artificial. There's not a lot of things in your life that I can think of that have a positive spin when you say artificial. But also I think it acknowledges the fact that we're not seeing this as a tool to replace anybody. But it's really important that at a school of medicine where many of us are practicing clinicians, that the tools that we put in place are there to help us provide the best care. And so they are really meant to augment our care, not take away from it or to replace it. And I think there's no risk of that. It's very clear to me that's an unrealistic fear we have right now, at least for the foreseeable future. I think it's really about ensuring that we're providing support rather than replacing.
And it's you said, sort of a people-driven institute, like you mentioned, people first, and you've created some guiding principles for the institute. I'd love for you to share those with me.
Easy way to think of it is we're at a school of medicine. Many of us are practicing clinicians. We took the Hippocratic Oath, and so many of the principles are modeled off the Hippocratic Oath. All of the key principles are in there. Things like beneficence, things like respect for physicians and patients, acknowledgement that this is art, not just science, that you can't solve everything with a surgeon's steel. This is the same thing. This is a tool like a surgeon's steel, and it's not the only way you deliver care. There's a very human, they talk about art, a human nature to this, and we want to emphasize the human nature of this enhanced with technology. The other key piece in there is privacy. And so, we hear a lot in the news about privacy violations, whether it be credit card companies. It may have affected people listening to this podcast. We hear about breaches in healthcare. That is also an absolute core principle. And actually, some of my own work, I have focused in the data privacy space. And so this is a chance to bring some of those principles to bear and, again, make it available more widely for investigators across our campus.
Why is Northwestern such a good match for an institute like this to be a leader in this area where we're really looking at the people aspect of augmented intelligence?
Well, I think as I was walking over, I saw a bus go by that says "Better," right? Yes. That's the logo. And we are very, very fortunate in Northwestern that we have an amazing healthcare institution that's growing, that provides amazing care for people in this region. We have the School of Medicine, which is a research powerhouse. And then we also have the Evanston Prime Campus, which has an amazing set of investigators. And I've been very lucky to get to know and work and collaborate with a number of the folks they're in computer science, some in law, some in engineering. They're doing profound and amazing work. Now, we're separated by some distance, and so you have to take the bus back and forth. Right. It's a great bus system, so I have to say that's practically we
it's
have
a beautiful ride
it's
by
great.
The lake. Yes,
it's peaceful time. I can catch up on reading. So it's these little subtle things actually make a difference, but it allows us to really collaborate across campuses, all three campuses. And I should say that is actually a really important part of this institute is bringing together the best we can across those three institutions, the hospital system, the School of Medicine, and the North Campus. And I think we've made some good progress, and there's still more to do.
So there has been some headlines coming out of the medical school in the past maybe 6 to 9 months about AI. One of them was someone who's in your institute now, Mazi Edamati.
Yep.
2 studies working with Google showing how AI can better predict lung cancer, breast cancer. Tell me a little bit about that work and how physicians and scientists here at Northwestern are already using AI in research.
And he's put together really an amazing team. And also an engineer, I should point out. Actually, the team of all of us, there was actually, in the central data team, all have some engineering or technical background for the most part. And what he's realized is that there's this combination of social and sort of organizational hurdles you have to get through, and he's managed that really well. And then also there's the technical aspects, and he's put together this wonderful team that is able to, again, focus on getting the best quality data. We're really fortunate to have him and Faraz Webby, who's our informatics officer, and Yuan Lo, who's an expert in AI, and we've got Kelly Michelson, who's just a wonderful person and very thoughtful about sort of what the ethical implications are of some of these projects and these tools. And so, we're really, I couldn't be more thrilled, and I think that's been a really exciting. Maybe slightly different than some of the other institutes, is that we are really focused on building supporting a team that can support and scale infrastructure and data pipes. Fully expect actually that this is going to have really great yield downstream.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the controversial aspects of this technology, and how is the institute going to address those concerns?
Yeah, so I think that we do hear about AI, and people think about, we're all going to be replaced, we'll all be out of jobs. I don't see it that way, but I do think that there are a number of places where we have to be very thoughtful in researching and applying AI. I think I've already mentioned one, and that's around privacy. Obviously, to realize the full value of artificial intelligence, machine learning models, you need to feed those really oftentimes large volumes of data. That is something that we have to think through, because the data isn't ours, it's the patient's. They generate that data, especially in healthcare. And so that brings up all sorts of privacy issues and legal issues, frankly, that we have to work through. And so we want to make sure that we're doing it right. And so from the get-go, we're really deadly focused on ensuring that every project that touches any data has a very clear stance on ensuring privacy. And I think that's foundational. So we need to get that part right. The other aspect is in how do we actually use these in clinical care? How do you take these tools and use them? And we also have to recognize there that the tools themselves are only as good as how we've educated them. And the issue is that we currently, the state of health and health research is that there is a tremendous amount of bias already in health research. So we have an opportunity in educating these tools that will go forth and scale the improvements we're going to try to make to ensure that they're doing it in the least biased way possible, so that it can be the most representative of our population and take care of the most people that we can responsibly. And so that's something that we're also very thoughtful about, is trying to understand what are the biases that might be introduced when we use these types of tools. And this is not an easily solved thing. This is an ongoing conversation that we have to have within our organization, across our organization, engaging other stakeholders. This is something that we don't want to get enamored and just rush forward with technology. We can't afford to move fast and break things. We have to, because if we break things, like, people will die. So we have to be very thoughtful from the bottom data layer all the way up to the application layer about how are we thoughtfully passing every single step and doing so in an ethical, responsible way. And that's really going to be we're really going to put a laser beam focus on that for all the projects.
I love this idea of educating tools, much like how we educate our students here at Feinberg. Because when you're talking about tools, you were talking about everything from wearables to other pieces of technology to algorithms. And this really is, you said, responsibility to teach these tools.
That's right. And so the augmentation goes the other way. I mean, in reality, there's so-called supervised learning and unsupervised learning. And the reality is right now there's still a lot of need for supervision of the models that we're putting in place. And the state of the data today is so not great that if you were to let a machine learn from our current clinical records in an unsupervised way, I think you'd find that it would return back a type of tool that was very repetitive, had a lot of mistakes in it, like documentation mistakes. It would just not be the most efficient communicator, is what I would say. And I think that's something that, again, gets back to how do we ensure that we're educating these models, these computer models, in using the best quality data and with the least biased data we can.
What can we expect right away? Do you have some ideas about some of the first projects that you all are going to embark on?
One thing that's really important to me is that we're not driving this. That sounds strange, but let me bear with me. Our initial out of the gate approach is going to be an inventory. We really want to understand what are the highest priority data needs that will enable the most research on campus. We have a sense for what that's going to be, though. It's pretty clear that there are certain types of existing structured data that we can do a better job with pulling together to enable researchers, for example, in radiology, in pathology, cardiology. And more importantly, we've found champions. We've identified local clinician champions, local research champions. And it turns out that there is a tremendous amount of really talented and super smart people and resources that exist already on campus. And so our job in many ways is to coordinate and coalesce those resources, infuse a little bit of help where we can, so that they themselves can bring themselves up and have the capacity to do the kinds of work they want to do. It's a different model. It's not a build it, they will come model. It is a community building model, which in my experience is the only sustainable path forward. Otherwise, you have to constantly be infusing external funds to make those things run. But if we build a community, oftentimes you will find that they will stand themselves up and eventually become self-supporting. It's like raising kids. I have some kids, and we certainly will raise them up to a certain point. But at some point in time, they have to learn to stand on their own, and that's where teaching people to be able to sort of cook your own food, I think, is really important. But of course, giving them all the tools they need to be able to do that, and that's where we can really be helpful.
Tell me about your path here to Feinberg and to becoming the director of this new Institute of Augmented Intelligence and Medicine.
My path here was conventional up to a point, and then I think I took a couple side paths, which really helped shape how I got here. So I did an undergraduate degree in theoretical and applied mechanics, which in the last century was called that. Now it's called mechanical engineering.
Yeah.
And after that, I went to medical school. But in between college and medical school, I spent a year studying, or actually working abroad in London, at which time I sort of took a job as a administrative temp working on budgets for the London region of English Heritage. And at that time, I realized the value of databases. And so I learned a lot about the importance of managing data across the population, in this case with budgets. So when I came back, I had the opportunity to work for a consultancy for a large food company. And at that time, we were trying to organize all of the ingredients within recipes into a large database. And so it was an early lesson in the value of ontologies and databases again. So then fast forward, I go to medical school, I go to residency, a medicine residency, and then during my chief residency, I was fortunate to have met Robert Schilling, who is a famous professor who invented the Schilling test, a test for B12 deficiency. And he's also a hematologist and also formerly the chair of medicine there. He was a really experienced fly fisherman. I wanted to learn how to fly fish. He needed help with the database. And so what I did is, in exchange for helping him with his database, he took me fly fishing. And during those fly fishing sessions, afterwards, we'd go back to his place, we'd sit down, have a drink, eat some snacks, and we'd talk about career. And he said, well, you remind me of this other guy that was here, a long time ago, and he was also interested in computers and how you might apply those to healthcare, and you should go meet him. And so he introduced me to Clem McDonald, who was in Indianapolis at a place called the Regenstrief Institute, sort of an internationally known informatics shop. And so I flew down there, I met him, and I still remember, we hit it off. Clem is a wonderful, wonderful guy, still a dear friend. And he as I was walking away, he said he came back and said, "Hey, I've got this thing for you." And he gave me a jacket with the Regenstrief logo on it. And he says, "You have to make the right decision for you." And then I was sold. I don't know what about that sold
You're
me.
Like,
but
all right, I will. Yes.
And it seemed so like an epic decision to make.
Yeah.
And it kind of was at the time, because I was already on a path to going into pulmonary critical care, and I was moving my way towards fellowship, spending a lot of time in the intensive care unit. Really loved that the intensity of that experience, and then after that I switched, and this is just before leaving chief residency, and so it was a real shift. I think people were quite surprised when I went up to sort of announce where I was going to go, which they do at the end of that year, and everyone thought, oh, he'll be going or staying here in pulm critical care. And then they said, he's going to do medical informatics in Indianapolis. And I think people were stunned. I think
like,
it was...
What? How did this happen?
Yeah, it was sort of embarrassing because, your family's there and you're expecting applause. And it was a polite, like little smattering of applause. And so I think that was, one of those steps off the path. But it turns out it was a really great experience. Really learned a lot. I had a wonderful environment to live and work in and be creative in Indianapolis and at Regenstrief. And I still have a lot of collaborations with Regenstrief now.
Well, and who knew that foresight you had, because now databases and how we do almost everything and medicine and life comes back to those very basic principles, organizing data.
Yeah, totally. And it was, there's an element of luck, I think, clearly in these types of things. But it did seem pretty clear, I think, having seen sort of the different steps even before that and the value that understanding this could bring. It was pretty clear when you go from an engineering background into medicine how grossly inefficient our operations are. And it didn't take long to realize that and to recognize that there's got to be a better way. And it's not just all technical. I think that was one of the big lessons at Regenstrief, is that a lot of our problems can't be solved with just technology, but there's oftentimes a social and organizational component to it that oftentimes is more challenging. And so that was an important early lesson during fellowship, and it's one that we've really embraced in our current center and will also embrace within the Institute.
In your current center you're talking about is CHIP, so you went from Indianapolis. Did you come here to Chicago then, to Feinberg, after that experience?
I did, yep. I had a couple other considerations at the time, but Northwestern provided the best environment at the time. It really had the most advanced electronic health record instance in place compared to the other places I talked to, which tried to sell it and say, "Oh, it's coming, it's going to be here." But it was pretty clear to me that this was the place that had the best growth potential.
So then how did you come from fellowship? You're at Northwestern, you become the director of this center, CHIP, and now you're the director of this new Institute on Augmented Intelligence.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate. I think I appreciate the opportunities that have been given me at Northwestern, and I think it's a recognition that this type of work is enabling. It's not actually about my success. I do think that if we do our job well, then we will enable many other researchers, not just here at Northwestern, but across our region and nationally, to really be able to increase the productivity, the quality of their research. And I think ultimately it's going to impact more people. And so we really see ourselves as enablers, as people that build tools that other people can use, real scientists can use. I oftentimes joke amongst my team that we're really nothing more than plumbers. And we should get those shirts, those kind of like logo shirts. But because what we're seeing is that in healthcare and in research, it's been set up to be oftentimes in these little bespoke sort of shops, these little it's a cottage industry, and it's oftentimes lacking the scalable infrastructure that you would need, data infrastructure and administrative infrastructure, to support larger volume of data research or research on larger data volumes even. And so one of our goals, and the reason we use plumbing is because when you think about a building, they work because somebody has gone in and put pipes through the whole building before they get to the faucets. And what that means now that everyone that lives in that building now can go to a faucet, turn on hot water or cold water, and they know they're going to get hot water or cold water. And the current state is not that. The current state is everyone in the building goes out of the building, they go and they buy a bottle of water off the street, or they go to the river and get a bucket of water. And we're trying to change that so that every researcher, every clinician that needs access to good, clean, high-quality data can just turn on a faucet and it gets you great data. So that's really, I think, the strategy we're taking both in CHIP and also in the Institute.
Well, how can people get involved? Is this just for the Feinberg community? You mentioned McCormick over in Evanston. Are you expecting people from all different disciplines to become members?
Definitely. So it's certainly open to all Northwestern faculty. And we also want to be sure that we're engaging folks outside our community as well. And so thanks for asking that question, because we do also have a internal advisory committee, which we've got a good start on right now that's spanning our campuses and the hospital system. As we mentioned, those are the three most important constituents to start with. And then also we have an external advisory committee, which is still forming, but we hope will give us insight into what are the market needs, what are the market challenges, and where could the work we do have the greatest impact. And so we have a couple different ways to get involved. The immediate way is sign up, become a member if you're on the faculty here. We'd love to meet you, hear about the challenges you're facing, and try to help.
Well, you talked about educating these tools, but actually educating people is a big part of this institute as well. Tell me about the educational element of the institute.
Yeah, so that is a crucial part. As I mentioned, it's about making tools available for people, but we also need more people. And in healthcare, I had to step off path to be able to learn about these types of technologies and applications. And I think at a medical school of this caliber, we shouldn't have to do that. We need to be able to provide our medical students, our residents, our fellows, our faculty, and our patients even, all with the appropriate education at the level appropriate education. And so that people are best able to use the tools and understand the potential and limitations of those tools. Whether we do it or not, it's going to happen. So an example would be electronic health records. Those have been rolled out, and there's good things to them, and there's a lot of downsides to them, and they're really impacting physician workflow. That might be one of the more sort of leading causes of burnout. That's a tool that sort of got rolled out, and now we're sort of the end users of it without having had a chance to help maybe shape it as much as we want to, and continue to shape that. And I think this next generation coming up needs to be given a seat at the table and the appropriate, again, the education to be a thoughtful voice at the table. And so I'm excited that one of our centers is focused on curriculum development and educating our medical students and residents. And then we also have groups like the Center for Medical Informatics and Data Science, which is near and dear to me, and led by Justin Starrin, and that's going to be working and focusing on that next level education as well. So how do you train PhD students and graduate students and fellows? That's the type of end-to-end education we need to be delivering at this school, and I think we've got the right team in place to do that.
Within the Institute, there are 6 different centers led by different folks here from Feinberg. Tell me the names of those centers and who's leading those efforts.
So we're really blessed with having an amazing team, I think, of scientists leading each of these different and diverse centers. And so we've got a center around computational imaging and signal analytics in medicine, and that's led by Lee Cooper in pathology. But also within there are a number of programs. There's a program in sensor analytics, cardiac applications, and then augmented intelligence in medical imaging. And so, I've had a chance to meet with all of the leaders, and they're just gracious and collaborative. I couldn't ask for a better team. That goes for all of them. But you've got David Moore, you've got Jim Thomas in cardiac, you've got in radiology, Agelos Katsagalos from computer science, and Todd Parrish. Again, couldn't be more gracious, and I've been really lucky to have a chance to work with them. We've got a center on deep phenotyping and precision therapeutics led by Sanjeev Shah, one of the cardiology faculty here. Sanjeev's a good friend and somebody who is done some really groundbreaking work on how do you define different subtypes of congestive heart failure. His work is actually, I think, a really nice example because just like he's redefining how we the different types of a condition we thought was just one homogeneous condition, I think artificial intelligence and machine learning models can help us in many ways redefine many, many different types of diseases that today we think is just one type of disease. But in reality, with the right data and with the right tools, we can realize that, oh yes, there's actually 15 different types of this and 80 different types of this. And you think about that as a practicing clinician, that's not realistic for us to be able to do that, and when we shouldn't. And so that's where we have tools that we can bring to bear to help the clinician say, this subtype of disease is actually going to respond better to this class of medications or even this precise medication rather than this other one. And so that's one of the really exciting things that we hope that the Center for Deep Phenotyping, we know the Center for Deep Phenotyping is going to go ahead and lead. We also have a center in advanced molecular analysis led by Feng Yu, and he's doing the similar type of work but at a different scale within the biology sort of spectrum. And so he's really thinking about, how do you take sequencing data and how that gets translated into sort of, protein products, et cetera. And he's somebody who also has been incredibly gracious in sort of opening up his lab and working with us in helping to building out the right tools. There's biomedical informatics and data science led by Justin Starn. And Justin's been an established sort of icon in our field for as long as I can remember. In fact, I remember when I was looking at fellowships, informatics fellowships. Actually, I did meet Justin at Columbia when he was there. And so we're really glad that he's taken this on. And that's really a more traditional biomedical informatics, kind of what I'm used to, but with this data science sort of flavor. And within that group, there's great faculty. Nick Sulakis, who we've had a chance to work with for a number of years. And we think that there's going to be a combination of both methods development as well as education that's going to really advance the field and the people that are available for the field. One really important center, which already exists, is in bioethics and medical humanities, and that's led by Kelly Michelson. And Kelly's just a wonderful person. I think just a joy to work with. And she's reminds me every time we meet that although we have these sort of more startup-y titles of chief X, chief what, Y, but her title is technically chief data or chief ethics officer.
Yes, that's quite a title.
But she's really emphasized she's not there to police this shop, and I recognize that might be might be misconstrued that way. But what she really is there is to help us again convene the right people, to have the right conversations as we start developing these tools and putting them out into practice. And so it's not a police role; it's a shepherd and a convener than as a police officer. And then we have the Center for Education and Data Science and Digital Health, and that's led by Marianne Green and David Leibovitz from the medical school. And David, who's we're thankful he's back with us, and he's one of the few people on campus actually who is a fellow in the American Medical Informatics Association on the clinical side. And so he's an established leader in the field of how do you apply these tools into practice. And so we're really thrilled that he's there as an exemplar to help teach the next generation of students how to use these tools responsibly in practice. One of our centers, the Center for Computational Imaging and Signal Analytics in Medicine, and it's led by Lee Cooper out of pathology. And he's doing really exciting work on phenotyping disease or tissue based on histopathology slides. So really exciting work that Lee's leading. Within his center, there's also several programs. So there's a program in sensor analytics led by David Moore and Nabil Ashrafa, and they're doing really interesting work oftentimes in the mental health or behavioral health space. So that's a very exciting, and using mobile technology. We've got Jim Thomas, who's been doing a lot of industry collaborations and is helping to lead some of the efforts through the Northwestern Medicine Bloom Cardiovascular Institute, along with Pat McCarthy. And so they're deadly focused on cardiac applications and already doing really innovative work. And again, I think I mentioned some earlier with smart stethoscopes and enhanced echo capture. So we're really excited about the work that they're already doing there. And then there's a program in augmented intelligence in medical imaging, and that is led by Aggelos Katsagos from computer science and Todd Parrish in radiology. And this is an area we think has tremendous growth potential. Aggelos and Todd actually have already been working in the space for a number of years. They've put together some very thoughtful concepts within a white paper that they've shared with us. We see them as really being drivers for probably one of the more exciting areas that we're going to see coming out of the gate, and we look forward to them also contributing their talent and helping us build out the data pipes necessary to do that work. And so we feel we're really in good hands with that group.
So we're just starting. This just launched, this institute, here in March, first week of March of 2020. What do you hope is going to happen over the next year, over the next couple of years? Tell us what we can expect.
This first year, we're here to enhance the existing and highlight the existing work that is already in progress. But we're also really focused on trying to identify the highest priority data needs on our campus and where we could apply thoughtful resources to make those more available at scale across our campus. And so in this first year, there's going to be a lot of, I think, outreach and enhancement of existing projects. There's going to be a lot of pipe building. And then we're also going to be developing collaborations, because those take time, and doing a lot of outreach within our organizations and then outside our organizations in the form of bringing in speakers, seminar series, and then convening some discussions that we can start around some of the more important ethical issues that we see that we also need to get right out of the gate. Over the next few years, people should anticipate that we will have in place more robust access to really needed resources. We think some of those resources will primarily be in the imaging space. Lee's already got a good handle on how do you do pathology data and images, and so he's working on that, and we're going to try to enhance that. There's a lot of work in radiology, and we know we have to work there. And cardiology is already work in progress. We need to enhance that, and again, try to, as much as possible, help scale that. We've got groups like Mozzie's group, we've got Faraz's group that are already doing amazing work. That's going to keep on going. But where we can enhance that, we'll enhance that. And I think what we hope to see over the next 2-3 years is a coalescence across campus where there's a consistency. So if you want to conduct a project here on campus, you know that you can come to one place and we'll be able to help you navigate your way to the most robust source of data that you need for your research. And we think by doing that, we're going to enable a lot more shots on goal to be able to be competitive both for research grants, but also ultimately to improve and make products and tools that are really enhancing the care of our patients.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Abel Koh, thank you so much for coming and sharing your vision and what we can expect in this new institute.
Great. Thank you very much.
Never miss an episode of Breakthroughs. Go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe.